Hello, my name is Margaret Beaver. I'm a technical specialist in circular economy at HSSMI. This short presentation looks at the reverse logistics process for electric vehicle batteries at the end of their first life. It's based on projects and research that HSSMI have done on EV batteries, including the Cicero project, which focused on reusing EV batteries in classic cars. Electric vehicle sales are expected to greatly increase in the coming years, and with it, the volume of batteries reaching the end of their first life will also significantly increase. However, the processes to support second life opportunities with EV batteries aren't yet clearly established, but there are reverse logistics pathways that are worth considering. So what are reverse logistics? There isn't a fixed definition, but is generally understood to relate to a product's life cycle after the end of its first useful life. It includes all the parts of the return process with the purpose of capturing any possible additional value and then ensuring that the product is correctly disposed of. The reverse logistics process for EV batteries starts when the EV battery comes to the end of its first life. It could be when the EV battery no longer has enough capacity for a normal vehicle and has to be replaced. The battery would probably be then dealt with by a car dealership or garage. Or the end of the first life could be when the vehicle itself is ready to be scrapped, when it would normally be handled by an authorised treatment facility, ATF. It could even be that the EV battery never makes it to a vehicle, but is scrapped by the OEM, the original equipment manufacturer, the company producing the car or battery. If the battery is to be reused, the end-of-life battery needs to be safely removed from the original vehicle, tested to understand the state of the battery, and then safely transported to a second life company. EV batteries need to have at least 80% capacity to operate correctly in a normal vehicle, but batteries with less capacity can be used in other areas. Depending on the state of the battery, second life options include electrification of classic cars and canal boats, mobile generating units, and stationary energy solutions. Any reverse logistics process, of course, needs to be compliant with UK battery and waste legislation. As batteries can be dangerous and hazardous, they need to be handled and transported carefully to avoid the risk of electrocution and fires, as well as disposed of properly to avoid pollution. Currently, when EV batteries reach the end of their life, they're classed as waste once they are moved. According to regulation, the organisation that places the battery on the UK market, typically an OEM, is then also liable for their waste treatment. Although an OEM could conduct second life business models in-house, there's currently no provision in the regulations to transfer this liability to a new company if they were to buy a waste battery for reuse. A method to overcome this complication with other products is to reclassify the product as end of waste, or to avoid classifying the battery as waste altogether. Unfortunately, there's no current process to do so for EV batteries. An additional complication is that to treat waste batteries, which involves remanufacturing, the second life company would need an approved battery treatment operator (ABTO) licence. These complications are recognised as barriers for a circular economy, and there are proposals to update the regulations to allow for second life opportunities. But this may take several years to be implemented. This makes it difficult to have a workable reverse logistics process for second life EV batteries. HSSMI have published a white paper investigating producer liability in the context of EV battery reuse. It provides much more detail about the legislative challenges involved. You can access the white paper by visiting our website, hssmi.org, or by following the link in the video description. To better understand the current situation for second life EV batteries, we engaged with two stakeholders, a large-scale vehicle take-back scheme and a small-scale battery reseller. The main insights from this were that current end-of-life batteries generally come from warranty and production failures rather than batteries reaching the 80% capacity, meaning there is no end of first life at scale yet. Second life options for batteries can be an economic opportunity for OEMs. However, as the volumes are currently not high enough, neither is the economic incentive for OEMs to explore other second life options beside export for recycling. Therefore, no formal industry-agreed return pathways have emerged yet. Authorised treatment facilities are already challenged with removing the battery from electric vehicles, meaning they're unlikely to take on large-scale testing, which affects reverse logistic pathway 1 option. If battery regulations don't change, electric vehicle batteries will most likely keep being exported for recycling. As part of this work, we've explored 3 different reverse logistics pathways depending on their classification as good, waste, or end of waste. The source of batteries are either production failures from an OEM, end of first life from vehicles, or warranty returns from vehicles. For all pathways, the batteries will be collected by a dealership, OEM, or ATF. For the battery to be passed on to the installer as a good and avoid being classified as waste, the battery would need to be tested and deemed reusable at the initial battery collection point before it's been moved. This would require the dealership, ATF, or OEM to test on site before selling it to an installer or second life company. Alternatively, a mobile third party could come on site to test on behalf of the dealership, ATF, or OEM. It can then be sold as a good instead of waste to a second life company and installed in a product. However, based on the stakeholder feedback, it is unlikely that dealerships, ATFs, or OEMs will develop the testing ability, and a mobile third-party testing option has not yet been fully explored. The second pathway option would involve the EV battery transported as waste, if being sold to an installer second life company. An installer would need to obtain an ABTO license in order to test and reuse the battery if received as waste. The third reverse logistics pathway option is for the battery to be reclassified as an end of waste product before being sold to a second life company. The battery would have to first be sent as waste to a third-party tester with an ABTO license to test and reclassify the battery as end of waste. Only then can the battery be sold onto the second life company and transported as an end of waste product, meaning the installer could avoid needing an ABTO license. This is because they would no longer be dealing with a waste battery. This method of reclassification is not currently practiced with end-of-life EV batteries. 3 reverse logistics pathway options have been presented based on the classification of waste. Until volumes of end-of-life batteries increase, a natural and industry-agreed return pathway will probably not emerge. Although pathway 1 would be the most convenient for a second life company, as the battery would avoid being classed as waste, it is the least likely due to the testing limitations of dealerships, ATFs, and OEMs discovered through the stakeholder engagement. With current low battery volumes, it would make more economic sense for batteries to be tested at a central location. Pathway 3 would be an interesting option for a second life company's perspective, as they wouldn't need to become an authorised battery treatment operator. Unfortunately, an end of waste declaration isn't currently practiced. As pathways 1 and 3 are not possible, pathway 2 therefore becomes the most likely reverse logistics method for a reuse model. For the UK industry to retain the value of EV batteries at the end of life, it is important to look at domestic second life options instead of exporting the value abroad for recycling. We've explored different return pathways. Unfortunately, the legislation and current practices don't facilitate a simple route for second life companies. Industry and regulatory bodies will have to work together to overcome the barriers identified and make other return pathways possible. Thank you for listening. If you'd like to know more about EV batteries or any of the other work that we do, please do get in touch, either through our website, hssmi.org, or by emailing Savina Vankova, Circular Economy Manager at HSSMI.